Hey, everybody. Good morning. Happy Sunday morning. Hope everyone's having a great day. And we're just going to give everybody a minute or two to shuffle in. And today's topic is going to be how how worldviews get shaped and changed. And we'll talk about beliefs certainly mixed in there. But SMH 369, good morning to everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you had a great Saturday. And again, we'll just give it a minute and we'll get started. Not too many people joining, so I guess everyone's still in bed. I'm jealous. So before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who was in the live streams yesterday. We did 3 of them. I might cut it back to 2 on Saturdays. We'll see. Saturday afternoons don't seem to be as popular of a time, but I'll kind of test the waters with that. But thank you to everyone who did join me. Last night was a blast. We didn't have anyone come on camera, but we had a lot of comments and questions and thoughts in the chat, so that was good. I'm going to switch it up on Saturday nights. This coming Saturday night is going to be like a poetry time, a poetry slam for people to share their deconversion poetry, to come on camera and share their poetry or songs. But going back to other Saturdays, whenever I'm able to do the live streams where people can come like an open mic, I'm going to pick a topic like how did Christian school affect you, whether it's elementary school, high school, Bible college, what were some of the things that did to you, even positively and negatively? How did that experience go? So we'll pick topics. Hopefully that'll prompt people to come off camera a little bit more. So in terms of today, I just wanted to go over some thoughts, but before I do, I wanted to give a context for it. When I was a Christian, one of the biggest thoughts in my heart was that evolution was not real. Evolution was an incorrect part of the secular worldview. And that it was important to acknowledge that God was very much not random. He wasn't just like taking marbles in his hand and just like kind of throwing them out there and hoping something organized came out of it. It was very much a sense of he was purposeful in the sense that he's mathematical, he's poetic, he's perfect, but also I saw it as he was trying to use nature as a way to illustrate something about his personality, about salvation, about the gospel, the coming kingdom. In other words, he kind of wanted to put his fingerprints everywhere so that if you studied anything, you studied a hummingbird, you studied the human body, you studied space, you would come up with information about that item, but you'd also come up with information about God in the process. So in that process, I began to write a book, a huge book, 1,000 pages, that is a book about worldview and about saying, what is it about this world that God is trying to tell us about himself? And that obviously is endless because, there's endless animals, endless plants, endless weather patterns, endless things about the oceans, endless things about space, science galore. And if you're looking under every rock and saying, this tells us something about God, you have endless content. And in that process, I began to reflect on the idea that what we're talking about is shifting not just our beliefs, but our worldview. That made me jump back a little bit to my time at New Tribes Mission. Excuse me one second. When I was at New Tribes Mission, they talked a lot about worldview because they said a big problem that people would have who are missionaries is they would go into these tribes and the missionaries would completely miss the worldview of the tribal people. And they distinguished it as there's a difference between beliefs and worldview. And it really sunk deep into my heart and head as I thought through this with them. But belief system is something you can articulate. You can say, I believe this, I don't believe that. I believe this particular nuance of this, I don't believe that nuance of it. And it's much more easy to talk about your beliefs, but your worldview can be very, very different. And I've used this illustration before, but I think it sticks. It's pretty easy. You can ask someone, maybe a Christian, do you feel like you are loved? And they would say, yes, of course. I'm a child of the King. He loves me. I'm deeply loved. But if they've been through certain experiences and certain losses and certain background, if you're asking them the certain questions, and you'd never want to use this kind of power to, manipulate someone, but just saying technically this could happen, You could ask the right questions and you could get them to say, actually, I don't feel loved. I feel completely worthless. Like, well, how can you say that? You just told me you feel, you fully believe you're completely loved and worthy. And yet here you are bawling in tears saying, I feel completely unloved and worthless. How can they both be true? Well, one's a belief, one's a worldview. The worldview is much more profound. It's much more intense. It's much more of your filter. So I want to start, I'm going to go through some ideas here. I'm trying to do it a little bit faster than I've done some of the other ones, but because I want to get your comments. But I want to go through just a quick overview of beliefs versus worldviews some more, and then dig into the question of, well, if worldview is so much more important in that sense, because it's your filter, it's not your beliefs, it's the filter of what beliefs get through. If it's that important, then how does it get shaped in childhood, and how does it change, later in life? So if you're looking at beliefs, we're talking again about specific convictions that you hold to be true, whether it's, we're going to focus here on religion, but it could be about, morality or politics. They're going to be based, of course, on what people pass on to you, everyone around you, your cultural family influences, your education. Some of them can be conscious, some of them could be unconscious, but that leans more towards, your worldview. And of course, they're going to be subject to change to some extent if new information comes up that challenges them. It's not as jarring to your system to change your belief system. Changing your belief system is not as painful of a thing. It's, a really simple one. Just, I believe honesty is the best policy. I forget who said that, but honesty is the best policy. I just believe it. You can state that right up front, but your worldview might tell you, again, something different, that there's times when honesty is not the best policy. You have this filter it's a little bit deeper, more profound, more the real you. So your worldview is going to be more like a filter. And I think of it as like a mesh. If you look at fabric filters or paper filters of some kind, some of them have to be very, very thick, like an oil filter maybe has to be super thick. Air filters, like the air filter in your air conditioner vents, they can't be too thick. Otherwise, your fan wouldn't be able to suck the air through and your fan would burn out. You'd mess with the motor on your air conditioner fan. So those have holes in them. If you could look close enough, you'd see holes in them so the air can freely flow through without, but still catch the dust in your house. It's like a filter. It's a framework. It's going to have your beliefs mixed in, your values, your assumptions. It's like a lens. We've talked about the idea of a lens, but it's a way of looking at everything, not specific things like I believe I can pray to Mother Mary and she's listening. That's maybe more of a belief, most likely. But you're looking at things like, what is ultimate reality? What is my existence all about? I mean, my humanity, my purpose, my morality. It goes down to the deepest aspects of your existence. It goes to global events, what's happening on the global stage. And of course, it's not just what you reflect on, it's going to shape how you respond to those things. So your worldview about God is going to be like a filter. So I think of it this way. In some ways, the filter is going to have like holes, right? It's going to have holes that are very specific shape and size. And beliefs, imagine that beliefs are like dropping down through it. And your worldview is going to either let those beliefs through or not into the worldview, or through the worldview into your daily life and daily thinking. So let's say your worldview says evolution is garbage. Well, your belief system says the same thing, evolution is garbage. You let that through. That just drops right through. Then that's part of your active thinking. Your worldview says, going back to my earlier example, your worldview says you are truly worthless and unloved. Nobody loves you. And your belief comes through and says, I am deeply loved. It comes down to this filter and it kind of bounces off. And it's still there. It's still, in the environment, but it didn't get through because your worldview is more important. Your worldview is critical. It's the gatekeeper. Your worldview is the main gatekeeper of how you interpret life, how you make decisions, how you understand right and wrong, all that kind of stuff. Your beliefs are very narrow and specific. Your worldview is it's broad, it's wide, it's covering everything. It's like the ocean. It's all, and all kinds of things are interrelated and intermeshing. All kinds of assumptions. Assumptions is a good part of it. A worldview is what you just assume. A belief is what you confess to be true. A worldview is what you just know. You just know that you know that it's true. When you when you look at that, you would probably say some of the things I'm about to say in your head very quickly. Christians are going after the worldview, right? I think we need to start there pretty early in this discussion. Christians are going after your worldview as kids. They don't want you to confess, Jesus loves me, this I know. They do want you to say that. They're going to sing it. But they're wanting it to get down to your filter level. They want you to confess that you're a sinner, but they want you to just know it. Know you're a sinner. They want you to confess the Bible's the word of God, but they want you to know it. They don't want you to say, I believe it. They want you to just assume it. You don't even have to, at that point, confess it anymore. You could go years without saying the words, I believe the Bible is the word of God. You could just completely forget to say those words. And yet you just know it because it was your worldview. It's this overarching narrative that interprets all your beliefs. And it's usually a little bit more coherent in one sense because it's taking into account everything. And it's the filter for everything. But it's hard sometimes to identify it. It's hard to be honest about it. It's hard to be honest about what is your worldview. And that's why, I think sometimes we will have these moments in a counselor's office where they will, without being manipulative, they will uncover things. Maybe the issue of safety. You say, are you safe? Do you feel safe in your own skin? Of course I do. You ask the right questions. You uncover the right memories. Like, oh my gosh, I don't feel safe at all. I feel incredibly unsafe. That's your worldview coming out, finally. Your beliefs influence some specific decisions and actions. Your worldview shapes your entire perspective on everything, and it gets integrated together. So let's look real quick at some of the ways that your childhood is going to have all these worldview shaping events. How does your worldview get shaped in childhood? I think the biggest one, of course, is what your parents are going to believe. What they say gets absorbed very early. You're seeing them say certain things. You're like a sponge. You're just soaking up their faith, their rituals, their prayers. You hear prayers, 3, 4, 5 times a day. It's like, think of it too like music. Worldview is like music that's on all the time. There's certain songs, and I won't mess with your heads by bringing some kind of song that you all will be like, oh, Tim, put that song in my head. I won't do that to you. But you all know what I'm talking about. There's certain songs that will come on, and someone will play them, and you'll be like, damn it, that song will be in my head for the next 6 hours, and I didn't want it there. But imagine instead that this song is playing quietly in the background, and it's not playing for 6 hours. It's playing for 6, 8 years. Come here with me 1 second. Thank you, Donna, for letting me know about SOA. Come to Islam. Anyway, thank you so much for letting me know about that, Donovan. You're playing the same song in the background. It's very mesmerizing. It's hypnotizing. It gets into your blood. It gets into your brain. And so we're all taught to pray or say grace, however you say it, before every meal. And it gets in your brain and your heart, this belief that there's a God who is blessing you with this. The fact that there's food on the table it's a proof it's from God, and you should be gratefully received. You weave in that on more momentous parts of the year, your family traditions, your holidays, your rituals, and you end up, think of it too like iron. How if you've ever seen somebody like pounding on that hot iron, they're forging it and they stick it in the forge, and it eventually it's malleable at times because it's so hot. It's bright red orange, but eventually they're going to cool that thing down. And by the time it's cooled down, it's really hard to shape it now. You can pound on it the same way, but it's not going to work the same way. It's a different time of life now. Now your orange glow of your worldview is now cold metal. You're frozen. And that's both kind of scary, but there's some ways in which that can be a good thing. It keeps you grounded, but also it means you're very much unchangeable in certain aspects of your outlook on life. Things that parents do with talking to you through your education, through different stories they tell you, the values that they instill, even things like Aesop's fables, any kind of moral teachings are going to come up. If your parents told you, I'm sure they did to me, as well, lying is a sin. You have to be honest all the time. course, you get the George Washington, I did chop down that cherry tree story. But these things, we're talking about things that reach down to the deepest parts of your soul, as it were. I'm using soul colloquially, of course, but they get these things through early repetition and early traditions, early rituals. What your parents taught you becomes part of your worldview. Broadening out just the circle a little bit, your whole community, your extended family, maybe some of your extended family was also Christian. Many of us did have that, where if we ended up getting together for birthday parties and Thanksgiving, you weren't seeing your Christian family surrounded by secular people, you're seeing them surrounded by more Christians. And of course, church and things like that, even neighbors, there were also Christians. When I was growing up, our neighbors right next door were very, very strong Christians. In fact, on several sides, we'd see them. There was a local church that they went to. We didn't happen to go to it, but we'd literally see them on Sunday morning all together walking to this church 4 blocks away, several of our neighbors. So your broader community is like, it just becomes an assumption. Sunday mornings are for church. That's the assumption. All these norms, even in some ways, again, opening the circle up a little bit more. So, our society's obviously changing now in many ways, and it's great. But if you live in a predominantly Christian area, or the Bible Belt, and I don't know what that even means anymore. People say the South is the Bible Belt. I've heard people say Ohio is the Bible Belt. Anywhere that you just feel like Christians are everywhere is the Bible Belt, apparently. But you get drawn into that. You see, you drive by the Christmas lights at Christmas time on someone's property or in front of a church, and you see the manger scene. And it's like, okay, so it's not just my family that's doing the manger scene. It's my family, my extended family, my neighbors, the church, the school. Everybody's doing this. It becomes a very, very comfortable place for you emotionally and psychologically. It becomes your comfort blanket. And of course, in terms of your childhood experience, your education, whether you're homeschooled or you go to a Christian school, you're going to be repeatedly, and we talked about repetition earlier this week. Let's see here, 1 second. Looks like SOA decided to come back in through a different username. Okay, well, if it happens again, we'll just ban them. Thank you, Donovan. Yep, see it again there. Just got it. You're going to hear all these stories, and a lot of repetition is a big part of this. You're going to hear Noah's Ark over and over, and you through all these stories, you're going to get these impacts of like the wonder of God, the mercy of God, the creativity of God, the power, the grace, the gospel, of course, and it becomes foundational. It gets deeply rooted in you. So your education, whether you're homeschooled or going to a Christian school, and all these things are going to overlap with just lessons in life, whether your parents are just telling you a lesson in the car on the way home from somewhere, or they sit down with you after you did something wrong and say, we need to talk. We want to instill beliefs and values and behaviors in you that really give you a sense of what is holy, what is true, what is good. You're taught, of course, the golden rule at home, probably, and for sure in class. Treat others with kindness. And that stuff connects you to say, okay, if I'm doing this, if I'm thinking about the golden rule, I'm doing my neighbor right, but I'm also connected to the divine in some way. And you feel it. You feel it. And your worldview begins to be shaped not just by these ideas, but your worldview gets shaped slowly with the idea that there's a relationship happening here. And that's one of the hardest parts of this is you don't just believe God is talking to you. Your worldview knows he's talking to you. You don't just believe he's there. You know he's there. You see him. I've talked before about that example in the Matrix where Matrix 1, where Neo towards the end is shot. Repeatedly is shot like 5-10 times in the chest, and it looks like he's dead. They check him, his body's dead. The agents start to walk away, and then he revives. But when he wakes up, right before they all start shooting him again, and he just puts his hand up and the bullets freeze in midair and he drops them. Right before then, there's this pivotal scene where he's just looking at the walls of this hallway, and they've always been nothing but computer code, nothing but green computer code moving down the walls. But for the first time in his life, he sees it. That's your worldview. His beliefs the whole time was he was in a hallway. His beliefs were that there was an agent right in front of him. But once he saw the code, he was getting down to the worldview. What's really going on here? That's what we're looking at. And that can be when I say what's really going on here, I don't mean what's actually going on in true reality. I mean just what you simply perceive is going on. You're perceiving that what's really going on is God is there. He's talking to you. Of course, just talking again about circles around us as children, our friends and our social groups. We go to groups at church like Awana and other things, friends at school, even our siblings who are our friends as well. We're in these religious youth group kind of things at church, summer camps, whatever, VBS. Your faith community, it becomes a source of community, it becomes a source of strength and comfort, but it's quietly sending messages down to your worldview. This is how the world works. This is what God is up to. This is what we do. This is how you become acceptable to us as a community. And the social expectations begin to go off the charts. You know that you have to conform to these expectations to fit in, or you're going to feel their wrath and feel their sting. You're going to get excluded in some way. Feel like you're in the out group. And so there's this interesting interplay, and you can't always pull it apart. It's not like you can slice and dice it in every which way, but the ideas of what do you believe and what do you belong to, and what is your identity, who are you, and what's happening around you, they sync from beliefs to your worldview. We used to talk about your head and your heart. Heart obviously is just pumping blood. It's not doing that. But, again, colloquially, these are moving from your head to your heart, moving from your beliefs to your worldview. When you're a child and you feel like you see a lot of peer pressure to go to something like VBS or summer camp, Bible camp, whatever it is, youth group, you see all your friends going. You see your parents, of course, excited if you're leaning towards going. And as soon as you say, yes, I'll do it, those kind of little one-offs where like when you get the reward cycle is a big part of this worldview thing. Your reward cycle begins to tell you again and instruct you on the deepest levels, what is life all about? What makes people around me happy? And therefore, what makes me feel like I'm belonging? What brings me joy? A lot of this, too, is going to weave into the word inevitable. Inevitable is a good word for some of it, not all of it, but the idea of like, what is inevitably going to happen? How am I inevitably going to be judged? How is life inevitably going to feel good or bad, fulfilling or not? What's the afterlife like? What's the end of everything like? Your worldview is shaping how does it, the question of like from the Truman Show, how does this end? Your worldview is pre-shaping that and saying, I know in advance how this ends. Even cliches, the family that prays together stays together. But that gets in your head. We know that if you pray together, you stay together. It's not real. Obviously, Christians divorce at the same rate as non-Christians, but it gets in your head. And so it becomes eventually part of your worldview. And just the inevitability of like, okay, this is how God works. This is how, if I do this, then this happens. And we're pattern seekers. We love that. We love that this worldview stuff gives us a chance to find patterns and to sort of predict how this is going to go. And eventually it becomes a very big part of, who we are as young children and young preteens and so forth. By the time you're a teen, some of this stuff is completely solidified. Of course, early life events is a big deal. Whenever you have something that's extremely joyful or extremely horrific, any kind of loss, and, I don't want to list out some stuff because I don't want to trigger, some of you that have had losses, but you know what I'm talking about. But loss is where you're just like, what in the world? There's no way, God, that you allowed that. There's just no way, and yet it happened. And positive sides, the idea of like miracles, maybe more specific on the positive side, but a child who's in the hospital with this horrific illness, and it's like we're afraid that we're sorry, but we're afraid that your sister's not going to make it through the night, and the next morning they're fine, and the next day they're home. And it's like, wow, God intervened. And this miracle sense, that'll preach. And I don't just mean in church, it'll preach to your worldview. These religious experiences, these almost a sense of personal encounters. I encountered God, especially if you feel that chill down your spine, like you're listening to a song, or it just got really cold. Someone cranked up the AC or something, but you just feel it down the back of your spine. You're like, I wonder if that's God. And you're left with this awe and wonder. These connections that are in some ways unexplainable, and yet you do explain them because your beliefs have got dropped down to the level of your worldview. Your beliefs in some ways have informed them enough that your worldview says these unexplainable connections, I can explain them enough to say it's Yahweh, it's God. And of course, there are religious ceremonies that we do at church, at home, things like baptism, the Lord's table. We talked about that earlier this week, but they almost develop in you this drive to say, that's my home base. This is where I belong. I belong at the Lord's table. I am most close to God, and I am most fulfilled in my heart when I am at the Lord's table. I am most close to God when I'm singing songs with my fellow believers. And it becomes sort of like a connection that is transcendent. It really feels like you're transcending reality when you get that deep. It's like if you feel like you're part of something eternal, almost like you're connected to the stars or space or something. It's just like everything around me. There's such big circles moving of life and politics and the earth and time and space and a huge space. Like, I'm connected to it because I'm connected to the God who made it all. And it makes you feel profound. It makes you feel like you're part of something so much bigger than your heart, than you are. And it feels good. It feels good because it takes away that emptiness. Your worldview gives you a way to say, this universe is not nihilistic. This universe is personal, and it cares about me. And you get that deep in your heart. And it feels good. Again, it feels like home. Of course, the things that we do on the outskirts of that, like listening to different religious stories. I think of Adventures in Odyssey, Veggie Tales, things like that. They're things that get into our imagination, but they're going to, infuse. That's a good word. If they're going to infuse your heart, your mind, your imagination with this understanding that there is meaning and there is purpose, and it's divine in nature. And again, it's going deeper and deeper and deeper as you're a child. The same thing happens. I mean, we have to be honest or be careful to say this is not just about Christianity. If you're a child growing up in a Hindu home and you're watching TV that's talking about your Hindu gods, you're going to develop a profound worldview of love, perhaps admiration, respect for these deities, and they become part of your inner world. Every culture does it. This is not a Christian thing. Every culture does it to children, and some of it's inevitable. I would not say all of it is necessarily bad, but I would say a lot of it needs to be scrutinized because there is some very big psychological abuse that's woven into a lot of it. Again, going through some of the smaller but impactful parts of this, role models that we admire the pastor, the missionary, our heroes of the faith. They inspire us to greatness. Wow, if I could just be like so-and-so, what a great saint of old. Was it Robert Mueller or somebody Mueller of Bristol? I remember a book about that. He'd pray. He had his orphanage and there was never enough food, and he'd pray literally he'd literally tell the kids, go sit down for breakfast, and there's no breakfast. People say, why are you sending the kids to eat breakfast? There's nothing to eat. And within 10 minutes, somebody delivers something to the table. You read these stories, and you have no way, of course, to know if any of them are remotely true, but you read these stories of this guy that did this for years and kept on praying, and God always showed up big. And you get these role models, and they inspire your worldview. They inform you. Other cultures do it too. I'm sure cultures that love the Buddha, they're going to read about that character, about enlightenment and meditation. They're going to yearn to be like him. They're going to yearn for those mysteries of life that he plunged into, and that gets in their worldview. So we're all doing it. Memorization is a big part of it. We talked again about some of these earlier this week, or last week. Memorizing verses was a big deal for me. I memorized thousands and thousands and thousands of verses. Some of them we'd even sing, and it becomes like a song. Just like I talked about that song that gets in your head, and you can kind of hear it for hours later, even if you don't want to. These verses get in your head, and you can hear them in your head. I can still. People will sometimes start quoting verses during my interviews, and I can finish that verse. And I might not have heard that verse for 20 years, maybe longer, but I can finish that verse, and in many cases, I can tell you the reference. That constant exposure, it's like it's engraving. It's like, when you look at someone that's really good at engraving, metal or rock or something, and they do that beautiful calligraphy, it's got your name on it. Engravers it's an amazing skill, but That's what's happening. They're engraving these things into your memory, into your muscle memory, your mind memory, your worldview memory, and they become a foundation, and they become pretty unshakable. At that point, once they get to that level, they're not your beliefs anymore. They are, but they're not just that. They're not your filter. They are the fabric of how you understand reality. You got to get them while they're young. Of course, catechisms and statements of faith. Not all of us did that too much, but we might at least have repeated things like the Apostles' Creed, certainly the Lord's Prayer. These become as familiar as it's 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The Lord's Prayer becomes the same way. It's just part of every day. The prayers, of course, you do as a family and as children. Nightly prayers became a big deal for us as a family. Of course, I remember we wouldn't just pray; we would literally kneel. We would all, we'd kneel in front of the sofa. We'd kneel in front of chairs as a family when we were kids. We would kneel and pray, and there was intense pressure to pray, even if it was short. Pray something. Don't let it, when it kind of comes around the circle to you, don't let it pass. That's a sign of you're not serious enough about the Lord. So much pressure that comes into it, but that gets in your head and your heart. And of course, if you're on the right side of that, if you're not bucking that system, it becomes your security blanket. So Christian songs, of course, big deal. Singing Jesus Loves Me, the Bible, the Bible, all that kind of stuff. It gets in your head, and it creates these very deep-seated beliefs that these songs are carrying sacred truths straight to your heart, straight to your worldview. And it becomes emotional and intellectual, psychological. It's who you are. This rich repetition becomes ritual. And even some of the more beautiful things, like lighting an Advent candle at Christmas, they become these structures on the deepest levels of who you are. And so when we look at that, I want to ask too, just to wrap this part of it up, how does it change later in life? Because if that repetition and that early indoctrination, as it were, is so pivotal, and it is, I would argue that's one of the most pivotal parts. If you are, as a child, that iron that is red hot, that's glowing orange, that can be molded and shaped and forged, then how do you do that? How does a worldview change later in life? Because you're already so hardened. You just know that that's reality. And there's no reason to question it for the most part. So how does it change? And there's these things I'm coming up with are just thoughts I've had in my mind for a long time. And I'm not saying in any way that these are exhaustive. So please feel free in the notes, the comments, to add other things that I might be missing here. But just I'm coming up with a few high-level things that I think do change worldviews, or at least can. Put it that way, they can change your worldview. Some of the things I think are going to change because of people being willing to do personal reflection, and that's possibly related, or not related. It's possibly going to be very different based on your personality type. Some people are they're always going to be saying to themselves, "Huh, I wonder about that." And the more you say that to yourself, I wonder if that's true. Do I have the right way of seeing that? Am I on the right path here? If that's your personality, then maybe your worldview is going to be more malleable. You're willing to look at that, especially if you have any kind of, emotional turmoil going on in your life, any kind of crisis where you're trying to find meaning, and the sources that where you should find meaning, you're not finding meaning. It just doesn't resonate, and it drives you to that personal reflection. If you are someone that is into, sort of related to that, just the idea of meditation, where you're trying to constantly have a connection with the divine, and you're constantly trying to feel like I'm looking, God, for your presence, I'm praying to you. And if you're honest enough with yourself to say, it feels like in the midst of my attempt to be mindful and my attempt to be connected to you, my attempt to meditate, my attempt to be enlightened, I know it's not a Christian word, but my attempt for all these things, despite my attempts, it feels empty. What's wrong? And so if you tend to be someone like that, where you're trying to go deeper and it just doesn't feel like it's adding up, that can be part of that reflection too. Certainly people that are just intense students, if you're constantly studying information, whether it's science stuff, or it's comparative mythology, which you all know is my journey, where you're looking at things and saying, why do these ancient texts look so similar to my Bible? Why does the Epic of Gilgamesh have so much overlap? Why does the Book of Enoch have so much overlap? All these other questions, it doesn't make sense. Dennis MacDonald's work, why does the Homer's Odyssey overlap so much with the New Testament? When you're studying different ideas and books and texts and getting involved in certain discussions, if you're willing to have an open mind, those can certainly, absolutely change your worldview. It's not easy, though. I mean, when I say change your worldview, by the time you're an adult doing these things I'm talking about, it's a lot more difficult. And some of these things that I'm saying, it's the kind of thing where if you heard some of this information when you were a child, it might have had a 5 or 10% push and sway on your worldview. If you're an adult, this stuff's going to have like a 0.001% sway, but it can add up. But to me, it's much more difficult. Certainly, if you're increasing that into more like a full college course, where you're studying philosophy and theology, you're digging into all these great books of the world, you're going to start to question certain things, especially if you have certain teachers that are really good at pushing it back on you, and they're not just saying, this is what some people believe, this is what other people believe, but what do you believe? Why? Are you sure you know why you believe what you believe? And it causes you to reflect and say, maybe I need to have more of an agnostic perspective. Maybe I'm not sure. Maybe what I thought I knew was not as real. I think it's important to be honest with ourselves that even when you can say to yourself, I am actually actively asking those questions. I am asking those questions. You have to admit to yourself, but my worldview is already rock solid. So you have to say, am I really asking those questions? And that's one of the most interesting parts of this, is to say to yourself, I'm honest enough to know that I might not be being honest with myself. I think I'm changing my worldview. I think I'm open to alternative possibilities. I might not actually be. And I think that's in some ways why you do occasionally, very rarely, but you do occasionally hear of someone who has fully deconverted from Christianity. They have fully left. They can say with the best of them, Christianity is mythology and Yahweh is a psychopath and this worldview is ridiculous. And 6 months later, they're back in church singing the praises of God. What happened? Most likely, in some way, and this is oversimplifying the discussion, but in some way, their worldview was never actually shifted. Their beliefs shifted temporarily, but their worldview never shifted. Their worldview said, we know that your home base is Jesus Christ. Glory, hallelujah, praise the Lord. Get back to it, and life will be better. And that's what they did. Life felt too weird to them to be away from God. And if your worldview is your comfort zone, and you go towards agnosticism and atheism, you're away from your comfort zone. If you're not at the same time truly reshaping your worldview so that your comfort zone is no longer what it used to be, it's either just you're kind of removing that and hopefully replacing it a little bit. Then if your home base is still, I need to be in church singing hymns, reading the Bible, then you're going to have a huge pullback. Certainly related, just being exposed to other religions. If you've got friends, dear friends or coworkers that are like, wow, these people are awesome, but they're Hindus, they're Buddhists, whatever, they're Muslims, they're great people. That can change your perspective certainly over time. Again, a lot of these are interwoven, so it's sort of 6 of one, half dozen the other. But getting in debates with people, debates I don't think are usually that productive, but there are some people, certain personalities, where that'll have an influence. Conversing with people, debating people, listening to debates, listening to Matt Dillahunty, you can spark a crisis of faith that can eventually spark a crisis of worldview. And of course, that's very scary for a lot of people. So they're going to push back against that and say, it's too much. I can't take that. It feels liberating a little bit, but it also feels terrifying. You're doing soul searching, as it were. And again, I know I'm not, I'm using the word soul a couple times here in this one, and we're just using it colloquially, but you get driven to soul searching, and you begin to find yourself thinking thoughts you never thought before. And if you're willing to take that brave journey, it's like, okay, maybe I'm profoundly wrong on some assumptions that I've had about life. Certainly related to that is just, dear friends, counselors, mentors that are going to have a different worldview, and they're going to introduce you to different ideas. That can lead to a shift, a profound shift even, that's going to be eventually transforming you on some level. You might come across even a pastor, maybe someone that's still a Christian, but they just see the world very differently. And you're like, how can we both be Christians, but you see it perhaps, for example, through such a mystical lens? Or I've always been an Arminian and you see the world through this Calvinistic lens, or vice versa. I've always seen the world through the idea of God is coming back at any minute for the rapture, and you see it as no, it's a post-mill perspective, and we need to be actively establishing Christ's kingdom on this earth. And you begin to realize that there's implications for those beliefs that are affecting your worldview. Oh, so God's up to something very different than I thought. It changes your perspective. And again, it can be a wonderful thing because you can feel like you've got a better sense of God than ever before. I know people that have taken that liberal route, liberal Christianity, where they felt like all they needed to keep God in the equation. He's still front and center, but you need to get rid of the idea of eternal conscious torment in hell. But their sense of wonder and awe and what a great God we serve, that in some way deepened because they just took away all the bad stuff. They cherry picked and said, Gehenna is just a little valley outside of Jerusalem. It's a trash dump. It's not really hell. And, this, that, and the other. And Revelation is, metaphorical, and everything is like written away. And all the passages about hating people that aren't like us and that are homosexual, that those Greek words didn't mean that. They just kind of take all the bad stuff away. And they end up keeping this really good sort of invertebrate, syrupy, sacerdotal God that they do, like, okay, he's nice. He's, gentle Jesus, meek and mild. We love him. And that becomes their new worldview. Jesus is just a big teddy bear. And the world gets filled with more wonder and love and, ickiness than ever. And they feel so happy. And, people do that. They can change their worldview, but still very much keep God and Jesus right at the center. I've seen it many times. Certainly our relationships when we get older that turn to romance. If you have this deep emotional love and affection and bond, and eventually you're sort of courting, eventually you're thinking about, getting engaged and even marriage, you're going to obviously listen to what that person has to say. You're going to be thinking, how is their worldview different? And certainly even just, between, different people's perspectives, men see the world one way, women see the world one way. You're going to have people sit, from different backgrounds in terms of their language that they speak. Language makes a big difference. I didn't touch on that earlier, but the language, that sounds you hear as a baby are going to influence your worldview. If the world sounds very harsh, you're constantly hearing harsh sounds. That affects you. Your language can deeply affect your worldview. Certainly the tone that people use can affect you. But you're going to look at this person that you're falling in love with and saying, they have a different perspective too, and they've been through the same process of picking up on all these different beliefs and tones and language and repetition and culture, but they're like me. We might be equally yoked in some way, but they're still very different. How are they different? And eventually, as you figure that out and pick up on what if you try to see the world through their eyes, which is in many ways what a love relationship is about, is how do I kind of get in their head and their heart and see the world the way they do? If you can get to that level, again, you can kind of shake you up a little bit and say, okay, they're the most beautiful person I've ever met, and I love them. I want to spend my life with them, but they see the world so differently, at least in certain ways that make a big difference. And you eventually sort of adopt that, and it can get down to your worldview level. Certainly as adults, our religious communities, just like they influenced us when we were kids, they're going to influence us as we're adults. Again, all these shifts I'm talking about as adults are much, much slower and much harder to change your worldview. Cultural shifts, like, we all talk about how secularism is rising in our society. As you hear that and your social networks change, what you see on Facebook changes. Before you're seeing Bible verses all the time. Now you're seeing messages all the time of gay pride. It's like that's changing your shift. It's changing your perspective. Quite a bit of new ideas that are happening, and your worldview can eventually, if you're open to it, you have to be open to it, and you don't always know when you're really open to it. But if you're truly open to it on the deepest levels, it does actually slowly shift. It's like a very heavy door with these huge hinges. And there's a little bit of grease in there. It's possible to move that door, but that door is, have you ever seen those pictures or videos of the doors that like go up 20, 30 feet where it's just like, oh my gosh, a giant could fit through here, a huge giant. You wonder why they would make a door so big, but they do. And you just think that must take a lot of work to open and close that door, unless you've got like, 50 hinges and it's hyperly greased. But if it's just a normal hinge with not too much grease, that door is heavy as can be. That's what we're talking about. Your worldview door is very heavy at that point. Of course, major life events, getting married, having children, raising them, trying to pass on your values to them. And this is where it happened in my life. My worldview shifted majorly when I realized I had to pass on my values to my kids. And that shook me up in a way that almost nothing else could have. My Jesus had been my savior up to that point. My kids became my savior because they helped me to think through. They weren't trying to, of course, but the situation helped me to think through, do I want to pass on these values to them? Certainly suffering and just all kinds of experiences that create trauma in our lives are going to make you question what you believed. And depending on where your worldview has been all these years, when the true violent trauma occurs in your heart, it's going to either draw you away from that earlier and say, this doesn't make sense, that God's benevolent, but it doesn't feel like it. Or you can say, you go back to worldview and say, God's using this suffering for his glory. He's going to make something beautiful out of this. But if you're open to it, open to really asking the hard questions, that pain can transform you, even though it's hard to go through it. Even something as one-offish like a car accident. If you have a severe car accident and you feel like, one person might be like, I could have died easily. The doctor even said, you were half an inch away from having your head cut off and there's not a scar on you. You're fine. Half an inch difference and you'd have been gone. You'd been a goner. Well, God saved me for some kind of higher purpose. Or the opposite happens. A car accident happens and your body your some bone in your body gets shattered and you're never the same again. It shakes you up. Your worldview shifts. Certainly things like just overall, what would you call it? Overall small changes that you're positively making on your own life, where maybe whether you're talking about recovering from an addiction, getting in shape, just, again, meditation, some kind of spirituality. If you've gotten through you've achieved some kind of goal where you feel like, I waited on God all these years to get me through and to help me heal and to be a better person. And nothing came through, but I pulled myself together. I did it. I got strict with myself. I said, stop smoking that and start doing this and start being this person. I found some kind of inner strength and peace. Why didn't God do that? Why did it have to be just me and my own power? Those positive transformations, as it were, can really push you forward. Certainly, again, as adults, just reading, getting new information through books, watching documentaries. Art and music can be a big deal, both ways. I was a gallery guard at the Bob Jones University Art Museum. I guarded Rembrandt's and other Baroque paintings. It was just so inspiring. But there's ways that art and music can get into us and change us. Another big one I thought about here. I'm going to speed up here because I realize we're almost out of time. But traveling. Going to different cultures. And I've had people say this in their interviews, that some people, like, it directly triggered the early stages of their deconversion. But you go to a place where maybe you're a Protestant and you're trying to convert Catholics, and the Catholics are nicer and kinder than the Protestants have ever been. Or you're a Christian, you're trying to convince the Buddhists or the Muslims, or just general, non-Christian people that they don't have any religion, but you're trying to make them Christians, and you realize that they're happier than you've ever been. And you've always been, the well's been poisoned. And you always thought, if I ever go to a Hindu country or a Buddhist country, I'll bet it's going to feel so freaking dark, so demonic. And you get there and they're the most lovely people on the planet. You're like, those kind of things can change you. Certainly people do pilgrimages. I'm thinking of this more in the other direction of things that solidify your worldview, but pilgrimages that people would have. If you go to Jerusalem, go to the Holy Land, go to other places. If you're a Catholic, places where the Mother Mary has appeared, you're going to feel like you're deepening your worldview, and it can maybe be even more profound or mystical. Certainly, different situations where you've had to decide on morality and ethics is going to change you. Maybe presented with some situations where you've never had it before. Maybe you've been inherently opposed to homosexuality your whole life, and all of a sudden you have a child that is clearly coming out as homosexual, and you have to say to yourself, I have a choice. My whole worldview has said God hates homosexuals. God hates homosexuality. And then all of a sudden, this child that you dearly love is clearly homosexual. Your ethics and your morality are at stake here. Do you change your worldview or not? And I've seen, unfortunately, both sides of that equation, where some people become the most loving, accepting parents in the world, and others go quite in the other dark direction and are willing to, ravage their child's heart and paint them as, being influenced by the devil or something like that. And I think just in general, as people search, there's a certain point where, call it a midlife crisis for some people, but I think there's just generally stages where maybe you see a friend that's changing, maybe you come across a channel like this, but just something in you stirs up and says, I don't feel like I'm living my own life. I feel like I've inherited stuff that I've kind of like, this is just what we do. And you begin to have this urge to be more authentic and say, not what does my community and my family, my church, what do they think? What do they expect? What do they want? But what do I want? Who am I? Have I been authentic with myself this whole time? I think a whole bunch of scenarios can come up like that, where you just get prompted to say, I don't know if I'm actually living my life or I'm passive. Am I active or passive in my own life? And if enough of that comes to the forefront, that can go down to your worldview. So we could continue the worldview discussion on several levels, but all I wanted to tackle for this part was just to say, how does it get shaped and how does it possibly change? I know there's more to it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I'm going to read through the comments here before we wrap up for this morning. And if I see some stuff, I'm like, man, I've missed the boat. I lost out on some really good points here that you all make. I might, revisit this one, but I think it was just important to talk about it. Again, this was started by my attempt to write a book about worldview years ago when I was a Christian. See here, Fire Unbeliever, good morning. Tim and fellow heathens. Daniel Brown says, hello, Tim from Australia. Good to see you. Anne-Marie, good day, everyone. A voice so bright. Morning, Tim. SMH, love this topic. Been looking into it some time now. Awesome. If you've been thinking about this too, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Donovan says, good morning. The Mormon Atheist. Hello, everyone. I love your handle. SMH, I'm careful how I deal with believers today. I realize I once believed religious dogma and that we all grow and wake up in due time, and maybe not, but more empathetic than before. Yeah, certainly. Daniel says, good morning. Let's see here. Daniel Grubler says, brainwashing and indoctrination. Dark Matter 2525 has a very good video about this called Ridiculous Claim. Awesome. Thank you for pointing that out. Please, everyone, go check that out. Dark Matter's got some great stuff. Love that channel. And eyes opening, heart realigning. Beautiful to see you. Good morning from Scotland. Anne-Marie says, I can go on a nature walk and see beauty without resorting to God. Changed my entire worldview when I escaped the chains of religion. Yeah. I thought that very much too pretty early on, of like just looking up at the sky at night, the stars, and thinking, that's not there by Yahweh. It's just not. The Mormon Atheist, once you are bitten by the gadfly, life is so much more beautiful. Yeah, here you go. Eyes opening, heart realigning again. If I wasn't perceived to be listening at church, I was made to write out all hymns sung that service. It made it very difficult not to learn words of the hymns and have them instilled into my brain. Yeah, that repetition goes so deep. Star Child, homeschool. And Anne-Marie says, you mentioned the Sabbath yesterday. Were you former SDA or Jewish? Oh, okay, you're talking to somebody else. My hubs is still Seventh-day Adventist and keeps Sabbath every Saturday. Yeah, Seventh-day Adventist is an interesting animal. I don't know enough about it. I know enough about it to be dangerous, but I don't know too much about it in some ways. But I do see some videos come through about it. I'd love to learn more about it sometime. SMH says, so much to life than to feel guilty every day. Man, I'm grateful for these broadcasts and chats. Still haven't opened up to past friends and family because I was so overzealous. Yeah, that's a hard part of it for so many of us. We have to sort of eat crow and apologize and figure out how to move forward without looking like we're just, ping-ponging back and forth. This is the new religion of the month for us. we have to be really grounding ourselves. Philip Grobler, the hardest thing for me and a lot of us is that we were exposed to Christianity in our formative years. Yeah. If we can get kids while they're young, then you've got a huge chance of getting them. It's getting easier in this culture for that not to be true, just by virtue of entertainment and stuff. Entertainment is certainly an equalizer, but yeah, it's crazy. It's also important, I think, too, on that note, just before I move on to the next comment, it's important to try to, in my opinion, expose kids to some other ideas and try to really give a balance. So, so I'm gonna sit down here. So, for example, there's Disney movies that you've probably seen come across in different contexts where they'll say Christians are up in arms because this one has a gay character in it. And it's been really cool for me to be able to show my kids that, like, there is a movie, a really cool kids cartoon called Strange Worlds. Strange World of Strange Worlds. It's about people that are living in this town, and they can't really figure out why they can't get to outside of these mountains that kind of surround it. But it's like this big deal. They want to get there, and they end up accidentally. Some of the adventurers find out that instead of trying to go through these mountains that they can for some reason never get through, there's actually like a whole world underneath of them, and they can kind of go down underneath instead of going over or through the mountains. They can kind of just go under it, and it's not like they're digging. It's just there's a whole world there. They just have to kind of find the right way to get to it and get started. And it's a crazy cool ways that they did it. The graphics are amazing, but it has a gay, a kid in there that's clearly talking about 1% of the movie or less, but talking about being gay and being a boy being interested in another boy, and Christians are going to be upset about that. And it's a beautiful thing to expose your kids to that and say, hey kids, like this is okay, this is different. It doesn't mean it's we all have to be the same way. And that person might grow up, and a man might marry a man, and that's not bad. It's just different. It's different than the other cartoons we see, and just to put that in their heads that this is not bad, especially knowing that you don't know what your kids are going to grow, how they're going to grow, and they're going to evolve. What a beautiful thing to tell them. Like, you're not even telling them this, you're just kind of implying it. But if that's your journey, I'm not asking it to be your journey. I'm not asking it to not be your journey. I'm just saying, if that's your journey, it's okay. It's completely okay. You're okay just the way you are. What a beautiful gift to give to kids, in my opinion. Beautiful gift. Anyway, I digress. Anne-Marie says, never got a sense of belonging from my prior faith community. Always felt judged, and they were fake smiles. They were fake smiles. Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. Or that the smiles were very conditional too. Philip says, I always seemed to sense the falsehoods and fakery. Yeah. I wonder about that too sometimes. If there were ways in which I sort of subconsciously knew that things were fake and just kind of ignored it. SMH says, I was heavily influenced by the Tanakh, and fringe beliefs due to my location and major urban city definitely influenced me. Yeah, I didn't mention that. That's a good point, but your location certainly is a big influencer of your worldview. If you're out in the middle of nature and you're seeing trees everywhere, that's going to change your worldview very differently than if you're seeing, hearing honking cars all night and you're nothing but pavement everywhere. That's a big one. I'm surprised I didn't think about that before, but that's a good point. Let's see here. Fire Unbeliever says, leaving Christianity forces us to rebuild our foundation without outside influences mapping it out for us. It's both freeing and terrifying at the same time. Yeah, very well said. Eyes opening, heart realigning again. Tim is gentle as nuggets of gold for hearing and healing. Thank you. I appreciate that. You saying that. I definitely want to be a source of healing for us all. We need it. We absolutely need it. That's just, wow. Boy, do we need healing, especially with some of the stuff. Some of you reached out to me, so I know some of your situations, and some of you are going through hell. If there were a hell, you're going through it. So certainly wish you all beautiful things from this point in your journey. Let's see here. A few quick back and forth conversations. Disillusioned Pony Tricks, morning, y'all. I'm guessing you're from the South with the y'all there. Fire Unbeliever, as someone with a changed worldview, it has been difficult to avoid finding people who believe similarly and simply following them in a sense, you're doing the same thing as Christianity. Yeah, that's a good point. We have to learn to think for ourselves. Yeah, agreed. And I think that's a great point too. Politically, I think it's been hard for me to think through this, but a lot of people I think assume that if you're a Christian and Republican, then when you become an atheist, you'll be Democratic, which that has been more or less true for me. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that the Democrats do is something I should defend, and doesn't mean everything the Republicans have ever done has always been horrific or connected to Christianity. All these things are nuanced. There's always nuance, and we can't just keep our black and white thinking, shift it to change teams. But fundamentalism is very much about that. It's our way or the highway. I'm right and everyone else is wrong, and it's never that clear cut. Never that clear cut. So I agree very much in many different aspects of life. Anne-Marie says, the biggest worldview that changed for me after escaping was my fear of death. I now accepted and made arrangements to donate my body to science when that day comes. Very liberating. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the hardest parts, is preparing for the afterlife, or say the lack thereof, knowing that it's not what we thought it was. Cannon Smoke Chin Chin. I wonder if we can bring a class action lawsuit against religions that include hate speech. If you're a lawyer or know one and you think I'm onto something, let me know. I don't think that would ever win, unfortunately, but I sort of know what you mean by that. I wish there were a way to do that. Let's see here. Eyes opening, heart realigning. My last couple of years, I doubled down as a Christian and went in deep. My son then asked me, why do you believe what we do? Why do we believe what we do? I'd started home education, so we dove into both secular and biblical studies. Yeah. It's so cool when kids ask that question, why? Why is it that way? Why can't it be the other way? Anne-Marie says, the fakeness and false facade of people in church still bugs me. Can now see right through it. Yeah. Especially when it's, downright hatred. SMH, there were several tornadoes that touched down in my area a few weeks ago, and my coworker said, God must be upset. Took everything in me not to respond. Yeah, that is just, and that honestly, that's pure animism. If they knew what animism was, they'd be like, oh, these tribal people that I might think are so unscientific, I'm literally like mimicking them to a T when I say stuff like that. Very animistic verbiage. Eyes opening again. Good, kind people I was told would still go to hell without Jesus. I remember feeling so sad for them. Yeah, agreed. I heard the same thing. Oraculum Hammer. Jesus is a sugar coating over a turd called Yahweh, and people who convert get fooled through Jesus into having the perspective of ancient Jews who are jealous, spiteful of kingdoms around them. Yeah, I mean, it was, everybody was doing it. It's not one particular group. Everybody's doing it. Every generation has people that just say, I want to be more powerful. I want to be more in control. I want to be able to dominate. I want my narrative to win. We all want our narratives to win. And yeah, this is just, every generation does it in different ways. It's very sad. It helps you realize too, I think worldview wise, when you step out of it, you realize we're all, as it were, a big family. We're a big family, and when we say we wish Christians would stop, we're fighting for our own family. We're not fighting against them in its truest sense. We're fighting for them. I love that Star Trek movie where Captain Picard was captured by this guy, and they were in the elevator, the turbo lift, whatever. And Captain Picard was talking to this guy who had the gun and could kill Captain Picard at any minute. And on the surface, it looked like Captain Picard was trying to get this guard to have a moral compass and say, do you realize what you're doing is so wrong? And the guard says, so is this how a Starfleet captain begs for his life? And Captain Picard turns to him and says, I'm not begging for my life. I'm begging for yours. And that went deep. That went deep. It looks on the surface like, I'm begging, please, don't shoot me. What you're really saying is, I'm begging you to get your humanity back. I'm begging you to have some kind of morality. And we're begging Christians, please come back to the table. Please re-embrace your humanity. Please understand what you have given up. We're not your enemy. We're your brothers and sisters. We're your family. We're your friends. and we'd like you to come back to the table. We'll fight for the next generation, for kids, especially who are being psychologically abused by this stuff. But we're not here to hurt people. We're here to heal people. We're not here to take away things. We're here to bring new life, ironically. We're here for the truth to set you free. So, the Mahayanist mind, I don't care what people believe, just that they're good people. Like that. Anne-Marie says, I'm suspicious of church leaders that claim that they have a direct dial to God. Yeah, they have the same primate brain as me with no special powers that I don't have. Have you all seen that guy in probably Nigeria or somewhere where he literally claims that God calls him on a cell phone? That's so goofy. He literally stop the service or something, like, everybody hold on a second, God's got something to tell me. And apparently it's a lot of them believe it. So Stephen Boland, Stephen, thank you for joining us. Love this show. It brings truth to light. Thank you. Thank you. I definitely want to try hard to do that. I left the cult because of the truth. Yeah. Angelo Di Michele, noticing a lot of Christian end time preachers are warning of the end of days. Max Lucado, Perry Stone, Mark Hitchcock, Jonathan Cohn, and a lot of Christian television is jumping onto this. Yeah. I mean, when you look at some of the wars that are going, I mean, anytime there's going to be a war, there's verses that say at the end times there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, things like that. Any verse that they can grab onto, the fact, that between what's happening in Israel and Gaza and Iran, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, things with China and Taiwan, they're always going to jump onto that and say it's biblical prophecy being fulfilled. Philip, I think most heterosexual parents, being religious or not, secretly hope that their children are not homosexual because of all the stigma that society in general still attaches to it. Yeah, it's probably some truth to that. And yeah, it really takes a stretch in your mind to get out of that thinking. To say that I'm more interested in someone being authentic, being who they really are, their well-being in every which way, than them conforming to my expectations or my comfort zone or our society in some way. Like, I want them to thrive, whatever that looks like for them, and it doesn't have to be what makes me feel one way or another. I need to focus on what's best for them, and that's them. I need to empower them with their autonomy, let them make that choice. Megdora, I can say I believe in the ability to believe, but beliefs seem to need participants and challenges for the validation. Jesus, every member of this species has creative power. I'm not sure if I understand all that, but thank you for your comment. SMH, I now wonder why I would want the world to end. So much to enjoy and discover. Yeah, and that's a great point. We've talked before about how Christianity is a death cult. Of course, we're talking always about Jesus's death, the death of the animals in the Old Testament, the blood of Jesus, the Lord's table. We're remembering the Lord's death, but also the idea that we want death to come. Real life doesn't start until you die. That's a death cult. That's Christianity. Stephen Boland, respect for dedication to the truth. Thank you. Philip, my one friend opened my eyes when I was still religious, who had the F word in almost every sentence. Yet this is one of the most honest, least hypocritical people I've ever known. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Someone could use the F word all the time and be better than the Christians. Crazy how that works. There's no hate like Christian love. Yeah. Let's see here. Just a few more comments, and then we'll wrap it up for now. Philip says, shunners have left me with no support. Yeah, the people that shun us they want us to fail. Disillusioned Pony Tricks. Yes, from East Texas, where we have a church every half mile. There are a few churches up for sale around my little town. It'd be cool if the church buildings could be an outreach of some type. Yeah. It was interesting when I first deconverted here in Atlanta. There was a group called the Free Thought Society or something of it, Free Thought Group of Atlanta. And they meet in an old Baptist church. It's interesting. It feels almost a little bit triggering to go into it, but because of its change, it was okay. But it was a little too far for me to go on a regular basis, so I didn't continue. But I was there a couple times, and it was very weird because, around here at least, like Southern Baptist type churches are all very often this red brick, and they all look kind of similar. And you look at this building, and it's a former church. But interesting how that works. John says, good morning, Tim. I left guilt and depression behind when leaving the myth of Christianity. Yeah. Praise the Lord. So glad you escaped. Just kidding. here. Philip Grobler says, sane people hearing voices are considered insane. Religious people hearing voices are considered holy. Yeah, that is crazy how that works. Harley Aquino, liberals and Christians have too many similarities. I'd have to dig into that with you exactly what you meant, but thanks for your comment. Bill Lawler, I lost all my heroes, John Piper, Albert Martin, John Owen, Charles Spurgeon, John MacArthur. I'd love to recover all those hours and dollars I spent on books. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm getting some stuff out of storage, and starting to go through some old books. And I know some people talk about how they feel like they want to get rid of all that stuff, like just clean house and anything from John MacArthur or whatever. Let's just throw it out. I keep all those books for a couple reasons. One of them is very, very strange and has much more to do with poetry. I'll explain it sometime, but I look for what's called consonantal clusters. If you've ever done that, I've got this huge Excel spreadsheet that I've worked on for years, where it's basically this theory that certain combinations of words, of sounds, have an impact on you. And I look for those. And so it doesn't matter what the book is, any book by anybody, you can look for certain consonantal clusters and try to figure out the emotional impact of just what does the sound do to your emotions. So I keep them all for that because I want to use them for that someday. Probably will never get to it, but if I can get to it. But it's based on that idea that sounds are not arbitrary. But I also keep them because I do like to look back and kind of laugh at myself and say, look at what you used to praise. Look at what you used to believe. Remember what you used to do. Remember how bad this got. Remember how deceived you were. So SMH says, self-help gurus are today's new traveling evangelist, grifting and selling hope to mainly low self-esteem adherents. Just saying. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some place for, like, I do affirmations. So I hope I'm not a snake little salesman in any way. I do affirmations, and I think there's some ways in which if it's very honest, if it's just like, you're wonderful, you've always been wonderful, the universe is shining on you. I don't get into that bullshit, but if there's some level of like trying to encourage people to pursue healthiness, I think there can be some good versions of it. But yeah, I hear you. Let's see here. A few final comments here, and then we'll wrap up. By the way, I do have another live stream scheduled for later today. I'm up in the air if I'm going to be able to keep it, but if I can, it's going to be interesting. It's basically why Christians are, how did I phrase it? I thought about it a few times. I changed the wording of it. Fearmongers. Okay. Why Christians are fearmongers. 2:00 today. So if you all do want to join for that, if I can keep that live stream, it might be interesting. But yeah, it's good to think through all these topics. The mind is mind. Christians don't bother me at all in my regular life. It would only bother if they get people in government, which they're trying to do. I mean, they look at what they did to the Supreme Court. They've stacked it. So yeah, that concern is already kind of there. So I see some other sort of side conversations going on, but I'll leave those to you all. But thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope this was helpful. I hope you'll take it. Anything that I say here, a lot of these notes, like I've said, I've been working on for quite a while. Some of them for years. Some of them has been like it's in the back of my mind, and I'm just kind of putting down some notes to more recently to get us all thinking about it. But I encourage you to take it to the next level. I'm not going to be exhaustive. I'm sure I'm going to miss some main points. I'm going to, not connect dots. Please connect them for us. Please help us. Please take us to the next level. We want to think through this, but I do encourage you to, whatever you do with it, whether you come back to me with any thoughts or not, understand that Christianity is a psychological system. It's mechanisms. You're a cog and a wheel in this system, in this machine. It is a machine. It's meant to control you. And so I really, really, really encourage you to think through what happened. The more that you understand what happened to you, the easier, in my opinion, it will be to undo it and to make sure it doesn't happen again. Even within atheism, you could become a cog in the wheel of the machine of atheism. You don't want that. You want to be very empowered. You want to be much less susceptible to being taken for a ride. You don't want people to you don't want to be a parrot. Oh, this is the party line. I guess all atheists say this, so this is what we do. You don't want to fall into the same traps, just different group, but same traps. Empower yourself, understand the psychological damage that's been done, and the tools that they used. And hopefully we'll all get better and better at putting our spidey senses up and saying, I see now, and I'm getting better and better every day, every week, every month at how this happened to me. And I can envision how this could happen again in a new worldview of agnosticism and atheism or another religion. I don't want to be forced into stuff. I want to think for myself. I want my autonomy back. I want to be authentic and intentional. I don't need to be like everybody else. I can take a different path. I can take the road less traveled, even within atheism. You don't have to be like everybody else, but it helps you to get your autonomy if you understand how this happened to us in the first place. And also it helps you, I think, like I said, helps you to do a better job of being a parent and say, I don't need to give my kids these blinders. I can give them the autonomy too, to say, this is what I think. This is how I came to my conclusions, but what do you think? And you're free to disagree. You're free to disagree. And I'll love you no matter what. Love you no matter where you land. Anyway, thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate being part of the community. Come back later today if you can. Otherwise, I'll see you sometime this week, and have a great day. Thanks again.